The Crinacle Zero Truthear Project Red, it's a mouthful, but what it is an absolute work of business. It is a business move through and through, and it's positioned just where they think they can get away with. But we'll get to that later in the video, because all of that is moot if the product isn't good. So how good is it? Well, we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the smart. First off, the Project Red is identical in physical dimensions to its predecessor, the Crinacle Zero, and that means it inherits some of the not so good stuff. The shell is large and it's meant for only larger ears, and the nozzle width is a whopping 6.7 millimeters, which is that kind of girth. Not everyone is built like a Kardashian, okay? That's all I'm saying. Having said that, most IEM manufacturers will tell you that the nozzle diameter is kind of non-negotiable if you want bass. But that's where we get into our next not so good, the bass. Now here's where it's useful to start comparing it with its alternative, its predecessor, the Truthear Crinacle Zero. In the bass department, they're sculpted a little differently, and some people might tell you that this one doesn't have much bass, and that's not true. This one is a little more sub-bass focused, whereas the Crinacle Zero is more mid-bass focused. I find that the Project Red doesn't have that mid-bass thump. That point of contact is not quite as crisp and tight, and the bass seems a little bit wishy-washy, a little bit more fuzzy than you would prefer, and that's going to make a lot of people think twice about it, but it is still pretty good with some caveats. Now, in the box you also get a little 10 ohm resistor to increase the bass. Now, when I spoke to Crinacle about this at CanJam, why did he change the tuning from the previous version? He said,
so the reason why I changed it to version 3.0 was 2.2 still felt a bit fuzzy.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was because one of the drivers, when you put too much emphasis or too much of the power into that driver, it just becomes a bit muddy.
Okay.
Which is why I've diverted more of the power away, which is why you see there's less bass. Literally, that's the bass driver. I'm diverting power away from the bass driver. And now it sounds a lot cleaner.
For all you guys who keep asking for more bass. And I couldn't agree more, because when I tried to pull a little more bass out of it, either with EQ or using that 10 ohm resistor, it always led to, yes, a little bit more bass, but a lot more fuzziness. It would just lose detail, it would become more distorted, and this driver just doesn't want to give more bass, so stop trying to get it. Now, where it starts to really shine is the mids and the highs. Once again, let's compare it with its predecessor, the Crinacle Zero. For one thing, the Crinacle Zero is very Harman tuned, and that means there's this slope down between 800 and 200 Hz, which ends up making it sound a little bit thinner to me. At least in certain types of music, heavier music, which requires a little more heft, the Crinacle Zero, in my opinion, was caught a little bit lacking, where this, on the other hand, adds a little bit of warmth and a little bit of heft where it really should be. As a result, I think the Project Red is more suitable to more genres of music, and in the highs, it's a similar thing, where the Crinacle Zero was more Harman tuned, you had sharper treble, and as a result, a more fatiguing experience over a longer period of time for some of us. Some people liked it. For me personally, it was a bit much. If you wanted a Crinacle Zero that wasn't so Harman tuned, that fixed all the issues that a lot of people like me have with the Harman IEM tuning, then this is the one for you, because the Red sounds beautiful in the treble. It's nice, it's detailed, it's very smoothly, it's just well tuned, and actually sounds really, really good in the mids and the highs. Genuinely daily driver material. By the way, for my next video, I might actually pull a rabbit out of my Kardashian sized ear holes, so hit that subscribe button. And also think about becoming a YouTube member. Yeah. Now in the box, you also get 3 types of tips. You get the silicone tips, narrow bore and wide bore, and then you get foam tips. In my opinion, the wide bore silicone tips are where it's at, because if you go narrow bore, it tends to increase the treble a little bit, just increase the brightness a little bit. On the other hand, if you use the foam tips, it tends to decrease the upper treble a little bit, making it sound just a little bit darker, but it pretty much keeps the lower treble, the sort of 5 to 8 kilohertz region, just fine. And that to me sounds really, really smooth. The foam tips sound beautifully smooth. However, in the bass and the lower mids, it adds a little bit of bass and warmth, and it takes away from the detail and clarity there. So I would recommend just go for the wide bore silicone tips and call it a day, because that seemed to give me just enough bass that I didn't feel it was lacking, but still keeping the resolution in the bass. And in the mids and the highs, I just think it hits all my preferences really, really well. The question is it worth the money? And the answer to that is to compare it with things that are equal to or less than or more than it. So in terms of less than it, something like the Moondrop LAN for $40 or the HPB Khan, none of them compare. This is better resolving and this is better at layering complex music. At the same time, at the $50 price category, it's competing with the Project Zero. So then it comes down to whether you think it's an upgrade or a side grade. Now, if you don't mind either tuning, then it's a side grade, because realistically that 10 ohm adapter in the box, to me it makes no difference. I wouldn't recommend using it because it just makes everything sound a little more fuzzy. On the other hand, if your preferences line up with mine, then you could consider this an upgrade. And I think Truthear and Crinacle are kind of banking on that, because I've been told that it's probably going to cost around $60. Maybe just enough that they can extract it out of you without making you think of the next possible upgrade, the Truthear Hexa. Can we just take a moment to appreciate Truthear? Over the last year and a half, they have released absolute bangers. I mean, there's the Hola, there's the Hexa, and in the middle, there's the Truthear Crinacle series, which is every price point has a noticeable upgrade in sound, and every price point is kind of class leading almost. And the reason the Crinacle Zero cannot be positioned any further up is because it would get into Hexa category, and the Hexa would eat this for breakfast. If you listen to the Project Red and if you switch over to the Hexa immediately, the first thing you noticed is a jump in clarity and jump in just resolution. And even the bass, the Hexa doesn't have more bass per se, but what it has is tighter, it's punchier, it's more well defined, including down into the sub bass. And when it comes to layering, it does better still. When it comes to imaging, to my mind, they're kind of similar, but to me, the Hexa is just a smidge better with pinpoint accuracy. It just seems to be better on almost every front. Not a little bit, like noticeably better. Which means the Crinacle Red is exactly at the price point it should be, or to put it more accurately, is exactly at the price point that Truthear and Crinacle think they can get away with, and I think they can. So to sum it up, as long as you don't mind that wide nozzle and that big fat body, and you don't mind the bass being not the tightest, punchiest, most well-defined bass out there, but still pretty decent, then the Truthear Crinacle Zero Project Red is, in my opinion, one of the nicest, cleanest, most smooth sounding iems that I have heard at this price category in a while. Yes, there are caveats, but it looks like we've got another banger from Truthear and Crinacle. Till next time, stay happy, stay peaceful, stay colorful.